Right on time. He's 10 minutes early.
Hey, excellent of yourself. Thank you. Your children are getting entirely too cute. Can you turn it down a little bit? They keep us busy out there with the working outside. Okay.
Welcome to the May 16, 2022 meeting of the Orono Planning Commission. We start each meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please ask if you join us.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the first item is the approval of the agenda. And before we do that, I've got a late breaking announcement that public hearing item number 2, LA 22-24 has been asked to be tabled.
Motion to approve the agenda. Second.
No discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All in favor? All right, second item is the approval of the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting April 18th, 2022 and the April 18th, 2022 workshop. Ask for a motion for approval of both meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. All right, let's see. Item number 1 on the public hearing is LA 22-17, John Ressler, 3683 and 3685 North Shore Drive. Request a lot width variance as part of an administrative boundary line adjustment between the two properties. Laura Oakton will present it.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I am part of the application, so I'm going to recuse myself. I'll wait for the hearing to be complete, I'll pursue my position.
All right, very well, thank you. All right, Ms. Oakton.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. Tonight, applicant has a goal of a boundary line adjustment and is requiring lot width variances for both of the properties. Applicant Rustler and Planchecki are neighboring property owners at 6383 and 6385 North Shore Drive. The applicants are looking to complete an administrative boundary line adjustment. Moving the property line boundary is a staff administrative action as long as no new nonconformities are created or an existing nonconformity is not increased. Each property will require a lot width variance in order to allow a boundary line adjustment, and the existing lot width nonconformity will increase. So a lot width on these lake properties are measured in two places. The ordinary high water with a 929.4 contour abutting the water in the lake, and then again at the 75-foot lake yard setback. The property is in the LR1C district, requiring 100 feet in width at both of those points on each property. Both properties are non-conforming as to width, area, and setbacks. Due to the angle of the proposed line, the lot width will decrease at the 75-foot lake yard setback from 54 feet as existing to 52 feet as proposed with the new line. Property 3683, which is the smaller property here, highlighted on the screen in front of you. And at 3685, the larger property, the lot width will decrease from the existing 92 feet at the ordinary high water to 82 feet. The new property line boundary will maintain the same lot area sizes for each property, and the new property boundary will improve many nonconformities on both parcels. The building setback, all over hardcover and lot width at the ordinary high water will improve on the smaller property. Currently, all of those things are non-conforming, and all of those will improve or come closer to the city code. And the new property line will move off of the existing driveway on the larger lot, bringing that driveway setback closer to conformance at 3685. I've included on the screen above you, just for a quick kind of glance, both the properties. The yellow line is the proposed new lot line. It's dashed and then I've highlighted it in yellow. All of the green lines show improvements in existing nonconformities, and the red are where the nonconformities will increase and the reason for the lot width variances. I've also included the lot analysis table kind of in the top corner here as a quick reference as well, coordinating with those same colors. The applicant has primarily identified the existing conditions and the improvements of the many nonconformities to the city code for each property as practical difficulties supporting the request for lot width variances and to allow the boundary line adjustment. Additionally, they have provided supporting documentation regarding the practical difficulties as Exhibit B in your packet, which should be asked for additional testimony regarding the application. Staff finds the proposed lot line adjustment would improve existing nonconformities on hardcover, building setbacks, driveway setbacks as a proposed improvement, and the lot width variance may be supported by practical difficulties. Again, annotated on the survey, staff identified these nonconformities in green, as well as not identified on the survey, but in the table, the hardcover for 3683 will improve as well. The variances are for the lot width identified in red. No public comment was received regarding this application. Staff finds there may be some practical difficulties to support the lot width variance to allow that new property line adjustment. The applicants are here, and I would be happy to answer any questions for clarification as needed.
Okay, do we have any questions for staff? All right.
Sorry, I have one. You mentioned that this adjustment helps the setback with the larger property where it's, I guess, affecting their driveway. Does it decrease the concrete parking or something on the smaller one, or is it unaffected?
They're not proposing any improvements or changes to the existing lots. They're only proposing to move the property line. So currently the property line crosses over 3685's driveway. So this change will move that property line to the current green space between the two driveways. 3683 will maintain the 5-foot setback that's required. And then 3685 will be brought closer to conformance, as currently they are not conforming with the property line crossing the driveway, and now it's moving off the driveway and creating a 2.5-foot setback.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? All right, seeing none. Applicants here, if they wish to approach the podium, please do so. State your name and address, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, John Messler, 3683 North Shore Drive. Mr. Kulchecki at 3655 North Shore Drive is also present if you have questions for him as well. I'm going to try to be brief just because I'm not sure where questions might be had, but of course I'm available if there are any. Predominantly, the reason for this application is to apply how the property has been used in practice for over 3 decades. I'm the 3rd generation owner of this property, and as you all may be familiar with, I became much more familiarized with the code by trying to rebuild on this property several years ago. Mr. Kulchecki has known me since my college years in Ebot in the late 90s. My father and him were obviously neighbors before he and I were neighbors, but how the properties are currently being used is how it has been practiced since before that time. And so this application is more so to allow for the property to be listed, if you will, for property boundaries as it has been practiced. And also, as you can see, the improvements to the driveway as it currently, by definition, is crossing into his driveway. It's improving that position, maintaining the setbacks of the 5 feet from 9. And I believe, and Ms. Oakton can correct me if I'm incorrect on this, but I believe the trigger for this is because we are shrinking slightly in that red line where it says 52 predominantly. That normally wouldn't be there except for I should say, I approached the neighbor on the other side to correct that property line, and it wasn't something that they were interested in necessarily discussing right now, just because it wasn't a high priority for them, so I left it alone. If that wasn't the case, then of course we'd be eliminating that, but we'll try to address that and rectify it at a later time. Other than that, I'm available for questions.
All right, any other questions for the applicant? All right, you seated. All right, we can open up for a public hearing. If anybody in the audience wishes to approach, please do so. All right, seeing none, we'll close that. All right, that brings it up here for discussion. Let's see, I'll start out with Mr. Kishner.
Very good. I do have one question for staff, I believe would be best. I'm noting on the survey here, the one that we're all looking at there, it states Blacktop Road. Is that truly a public roadway, or is that just, obviously it's pavement to access the driveways? So a little further to your, would be, yes, right there.
So this is the road that accesses the properties. I believe this doesn't count against them towards their hardcover, as this is the road that accesses all the properties. It used to be, I believe, part of the county road, or there's some clarification there, but I don't believe it counts towards their hardcover.
Okay, very good. So, I mean, my general thoughts on what's trying to be accomplished here is that it makes sense in trying to correct something that's kind of a simple thing that may have gotten overlooked in years past. You know, it appears that they're giving and taking about the same as far as percentages go and things like that. Obviously, as far as the hardcover calculations and things go, it seems like there's a slight improvement there on one of the properties, and so generally, I don't know that I have any issues with it.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Bowles, any comments?
Yeah, nothing necessarily additional. I do see that it is clearing up an issue that's been there for quite some time, I think. far as the way the properties have been used, and just echo the same as Commissioner Kirschner about it's kind of a give and take here. Part of it's getting smaller, but then that is getting bigger on the other lot. So if you look at the two combined, there's really not a whole lot of change as far as the non-conformity goes. But the reduced hardcover and the setback getting better in places, I think, is helpful.
See, Commissioner Libby, any comments?
Just a point of clarification for the staff, a question for the staff. There's really no portion of the application that really has any effect on either the normal high water mark or the average setback from the lakeshore. There's no effect. The application does not include any requests for any of those changes.
There's no effect to that average lakeshore setback, as no additions or improvements are being proposed, and this lot line boundary change won't change how we apply the average lakeshore setback to these properties.
Nor the average high water mark, the high water mark in 929.4.
The 929.4 is an elevation that touches both of these properties, and the width, the 929.4 lot width becomes closer to conformance on the 3683 lot. He gets a larger width, so closer to conformance there. I've highlighted in green, and the property owner to the south, 3685, has a smaller lot width at the ordinary high water, so
I
that's a
understand,
variance.
I just wanted to make sure that we were not dealing with any elements of the application that would have any effect on the lakeshore side of it, which
Yeah,
apparently there are not.
Yeah, right, nothing's getting closer to the lake, you're correct.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Peterson, any comments? Anything additional to add?
I don't think anything's changing.
Commissioner Erickson, anything else to add?
No, I don't say it appears as if it would not change the essential character of anything. The use has been going on for some time, so there's no change in use either. But some of it does mitigate some of the existing variances, which is helpful.
I mean, we got here is two non-conforming lots, and so, but I think we're improving the situation with, with the items that staff highlighted, and plus 30 years is a long time, and that just seems like we're correcting a right, especially when you got agreement from both neighbors. So, let's see. So I guess, I kind of agree with staff's recommendation here. It doesn't seem as egregious. It seems like it's, in fact, if you look at the fence, it's almost following it exactly. So and you can see in the driveway and towards the lake, it's been used this way. So considering that, I would entertain any motions.
I'd make a motion to approve LA 22-000017 as applied.
Second?
A motion and a second. Any other further discussion? I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, give a second here for Commissioner Rustler to return. All right, next item on the agenda is LA 22-24, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to table this one. So continuing on, we have LA 22-18. Have a text amendment related to setbacks of irrigation systems. This amendment would allow irrigation systems in required yards. Yes, staff presentation from Mr. Jeremy Barnard.
Yes, excuse me, thank you, Chair, Commissioners. This we see as a general housekeeping text amendment. But irrigation systems are listed accessory use in most zoning districts, including most residential zoning districts. And there's a setback for accessory structures of varying between 5 to 10 to 15 feet, depending on the We also know that irrigation systems, sprinkler systems, that water your grass and your gardens, they're located throughout the yard, and often they're located within the required setback. What we're proposing to do is add irrigation systems as a non-encroachment, allowing them to be located in required yards. Drive through many of our neighborhoods, you're gonna see irrigation systems with sprinkler lines along the property line, it's running into the yard. It's a pretty common practice. We're just codifying what kind of the practice is. Staff is recommending approval of the ordinance as drafted.
All right, any questions for staff on this one?
Just so I'm clear, I would assume the right of way would be the public right of way closer towards the street. You'd mentioned along property lines, so this isn't so much a neighboring property lines as much as it is public right of ways and setbacks.
It includes both.
Okay.
It includes the interior side yards, and also includes the adjacent right of way. The draft ordinance allows irrigation systems within that area as long as they're non-pressurized. That's pretty common practice anyway, so we're just codifying what practice is.
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions for staff on this one? Well, you can open it up for, if no other questions, I can open it for a public hearing on this. If anybody wishes to comment on this? All right, seeing none, close the public hearing. All right, I mean, that brings back here for discussion. Okay, pick on this end. Anybody, Commissioner Bowles, do you have any,
Makes perfect sense to me.
I tend to agree. I don't know if we go to do it everybody. I guess why don't I do it this way? Does anybody have any reservations on this item on discussion or?
Mr. Chair, I motion to approve, application ordinance LA 22-18, text amendment as proposed.
Second.
I got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Seeing none, call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, next item is LA 22-19, another text amendment. This one's related to docks and easements for the docks in the seasonal and recreational zoning RS district. The amendment clarifies current regulation allowing Big Island owners to grant dock easements for interior Big Island lots. Again, Jeremy Barnard.
Yes, Chair, Commissioners, just briefly, a couple of years ago, the city drafted an ordinance amendment that allowed Big Island property owners, Lakeshore property owners on Big Island, to grant an easement to interior Big Island property owners. I should note, this applies to all the entire RS zoning district, with Big Island really is where it's going to come. This allowance for easement for access, for dock access, is unique to Big Island. We do not allow it elsewhere in the city. And when we changed that code in 2020, we did so in the section where we started regulating dock access and dock easements, which was at the time in subdivision code. What we're proposing to do today is just basically take that regulation and add it to the zoning district for the RS zoning district so that a user can find it a little easier. We're not changing practice, we're not removing any rights there, we're just saying where we allow it in the subdivision code, we're now also allowing it in the zoning code. So the draft ordinance allows a lake property owner on Big Island to grant an easement to an interior property owner on Big Island for dock purposes. I believe it's been used once, to my knowledge, based on a request that was received around 2020. So we don't see any real significant changes in practice at this point. Staff is recommending approval.
All right, any questions for staff on this one?
Mr. Barnhart, just to clarify your question, or just to clarify the application, so what we're doing is we're just allowing in our language of our city code to allow an easement to be placed by a lakeshore owner for an interior lot. So this doesn't give any access without it being awarded to the parties involved, first and foremost, right? So it just gives them the right to do that, because right now our language does not allow them that right.
True, it gives them the right, and they still have to work together,
Yep.
between two property owners, but they have that as a matter.
Okay, great. And the secondary part that I feel comfortable with, I just wanted to clarify that you noted is that the LMCD must also grant approval for some things.
Yeah, any dock is gonna be, regulated by the LMCD, and so of course, the number of docks and the depth and the length and all of that is gonna apply.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know, thank you.
I just, trying to understand, so I just pulled up the zoning map here and I do see the RS district primarily being Big Island. Is there any other portions of our city at all that would fall into this RS zoning district?
And Deering Island is also zoned, RS,
Oh, there, okay, yeah.
and then, we commonly call it Big Island, but Mary Puna Island, don't ask me to say that again. That is also an RS zoning district, so there's those three islands.
Okay, very good, thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, at this time, we can open up the public hearing. If you wish to approach the podium, speak on this topic, please feel free to do so. Seeing none, I can close the public hearing and bring it back to discussion here. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, if it pleases everyone, unless there's comment or discernment with this, I had my questions answered, so I'm prepared to make a motion unless there was any clarifying questions needed by commissioners.
Got a motion, do I have a second?
I have a motion as well.
You needed that, that was your official motion?
I didn't want to preempt anybody's comments, but I also want to say instead of going around, I'm happy to make a motion unless there's anybody that disagrees. All right,
Oh, go ahead. I do have one that I'm really getting into the weeds on, but is this riparian rights or littoral, being on a lake?
It's on the lake, so, if there's a question that I need to have the city attorney confirm, but I believe it's riparian, because it's adjacent to the water.
Okay,
would be, the access to the property would be, both parts would be littoral on the dock itself.
correct.
That's the LMCD's jurisdiction, so that'd be the reason why they would be involved in the approval, if I'm not mistaken. But then the access to the landowner's property would be the secondary part of that. Yeah, I understand.
Question for staff real quick. This language already exists in the code. We're just asking to put it in a different section of the code as well.
Yeah, in both places.
It's the exact same language.
I believe so.
Okay.
In your staff memo of exhibit A, lines 1 through 9 are what's in the code now, in the subdivision code, and line 13 through 16, excuse me, is what we're proposing to add. And you see a lot of consistency there.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve, LA 22-19, as applied.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion passes. Okay, next item is LA 22-21, text amendment related to the exterior storage in R districts relating to vehicle and parking services. The ordinance would require vehicles to be licensed, operable, and parked on a hard surface. Another presentation by Mr. Bernhardt.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. This is intended to kind of clarify the regulation for the general user who may not understand the nuances of our city code. The way the code is written is extended parking of vehicles on grassy areas is considered hard cover. That area transfers to hard cover. And as you know, hard cover is a premium here in the city in many of the areas, especially along the shoreline and smaller lots. And so when we're reacting to complaints about junk cars or debris or things like that, one of the sites or one of the issues that we cite is the expansion of hard cover. And some people get confused by that, so the idea behind this zone, or this section, this change is to identify and require that the parking of vehicles be located on hard cover, which would either be concrete, asphalt, or gravel, or class 5 gravel. Concrete pavers would apply, obviously, because it's also to manage the hardcover expansion over time. So that's kind of the two goals. Maybe just a third is, a lot of cities have that requirement in terms of parking on hard surface to keep weeds down. So you can park and you don't need to worry about weed whipping through the tires and all that stuff. You have hard surface that retards growth of vegetation like that. So, that's the ordinance that we're proposing. Not a drastic change in practice, but it is a change because we don't automatically require you to put hardcover down wherever you put a car. We're looking for extended parking in this situation.
Any questions for staff? I got one, if no one else has any.
Davis.
I have a question, is there any chance on any of these that we're going to exceed the hardcover?
It potentially could expand beyond the limit, and then they'd have to pull back their options, just like any other of our applications where they're bumping up against the line, or they want a patio, so they lose another patio.
Is there any effect on, I'm noticing that this new text would require that it maintains a side and rear setback established for accessory buildings within that district, whereas previously it was within 10 feet. I don't know all of do we have districts that have accessory building setbacks greater than 10 feet?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
And that speaks a little bit to the goal of trying to put an appropriate location for storage of vehicles.
I would agree.
I'm just curious, so this does include, like, if you have your boat and you park your boat on your property,
If it's on grass.
if it's on grass, which I see that can be a big impact, I see those a lot. And so the guidance of, if a citizen called and said, okay, now I'm parking my boat trailer on my grass in my yard that I only park it during the winter time during storage, then the staff's recommend, our stance would be, well, you need to put hardcover there in order to maintain it there. But that's only in the R districts, right?
We're proposing this, in the exterior storage in the R district, that's where the change will occur, yes.
Which is every district. I kind of have that same concern as far as boat storage or something like that, because now you're taking something that's seasonal. Let's say you live in one of the rural residential larger acreage lots and you're seasonally storing your boat there, and now you're required to put hardcover under that is going to be there all summer long versus hardcover that would only be there in the winter. So I kind of see the intent, but I don't know if in my mind, I don't think it should be blanket across all our districts, which is every district. Especially in some of those larger districts, there is no hardcover regulation. So it doesn't make sense to me to require to put hardcover under that surface that's now going to be there all the time, whether that boat is there or not, or camper, RV, whatever might be there. Otherwise, in thinking of some of the hobby farms and stuff like that, if a tractor's outside, that's going to be considered the same thing. It's kind of, and we can get into the weeds of defining all these vehicles, and I think we've taken a shot at it here. But it pretty much includes anything that a person can sit on or be in, whether it's motorized or not. So I think it needs, in my opinion, I think it needs a little more thought as far as what districts this really should be in, and what the overall effect might be on this type of requirement to put that hardcover under. It would basically eliminate the possibility on a lot of lots to store a boat, which might be the intent, I don't know.
I have a question, forgive me, because I might have forgotten, have we already done the public hearing and all this stuff, or are we still just?
Still asking questions.
Sorry, maybe let's get into that maybe after we go through, then we can have our deliberation. I have some comments on that too, but I just want to follow the.
Okay, I'll do one more question for staff though. This is kind of get into the weeds though, but you know how you get the trending where you have, what do we consider, I think it's considered hardcover, but if you were getting those plastic cells and you planted grass seed in them, and it's kind of considered like a lawn driveway, that's considered hardcover, correct?
It is, because generally in those situations, the manufacturer requires some sort of compaction, some sort of to those media, whether it's plastic or concrete, so
Yep.
generally it's considered hard cover.
That's what I thought, I just wanted to verify that. Okay, well, let's open this one up for a public hearing. If anybody want to approach the podium, please feel free to do so. And as you do, please state your name and address.
Daniel Phipps, 4064 North Shore Drive. When are we gonna pursue this further? Does anybody know? This whole issue about the hardcover?
Well, I think we're discussing it now.
Yeah, we're discussing right now, and if approved, it would go into city ordinance. So your opinion is greatly appreciated.
Well, my personal situation is a rental house next to me, 4 vehicles on the grass, 3 boats, and an enclosed trailer on the grass. Occasionally moves around, but the boats are there all year long. That's my input. That's my objection. And I'd consider it an eyesore, so would some of the other neighbors that care. And that's about it.
Just to clarify.
And that would be working out the text details, and as you're saying, exactly where you're gonna draw the line, where aren't you? And enforcement, of course, is another matter. But that's about all I got.
Can I ask, in your situation, what zone you're in? How big are the lots where you're living?
Half acre.
Half acre?
Minus wetland.
Sure.
Everybody has the half acre minus the wetland.
Well, thanks.
So there you go.
Thank you. Anyone else? And as you come up, remind you to state your name and address, please.
My name is Greg Kahn, and I was called late this afternoon to represent the Rasmus family, Mitch and Georgina. They live on Park Drive, just right across the street from Forest Lake. First of all, I'd like to thank Jeremy for helping us out and kind of guiding us. We've been kind of after this for about 2 years. And as far as car numbers, we got you beat. I'm gonna pass this around. This is what these next door neighbors are looking at. It varies from day to day, anywhere from 10 to 15, 16 cars. We talked about hardcover. That's an issue to talk about. We should talk about also numbers on a piece of property that's not even half an acre, relatively small lot. These folks have been there for, 20, 30 years. And the neighborhood has changed only when the next door neighbor had purchased this piece of property. It does have an accessory building to it. And I think the building is probably being used for mechanical or fixing purposes. I don't know if there's, a license or zoning that needs to be done there, but this is an issue with these folks. They're both retired. They're selling their piece of property. They talked to me about it. I'm a real estate agent. They talked to me about this 2.5 years ago. And they said, let's see if we can talk to the planning and zoning and find out, is there anything that can be done with the number of these cars and what's going on next door? Because it does affect the value of this property that's next door. And again, thanks Jeremy for helping us out and trying to work our way through this process, and we've been very patient. They would like to go get up north to their cabin. They'd like to get their house sold, but we got a problem. And just recently, he turned, with his health, it's turned pretty bad, and that's kind of accelerated things to get things moving. So he said, would you please go this evening and see if he can get some kind of support, get some kind of help, so we can see what's coming down and, you know, as soon as possible, how we can address this. We don't want to prosecute, we want to work with the neighborhood, we want to work with the city to try to get this rectified in some way, shape, or form. So we would appreciate your consideration, we would appreciate your help, and let's see what we can do with this, okay? Because it's an eyesore. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to approach the podium, chime in on this one? All right, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, and I'll bring it to the commission to discuss further.
Mr. Chair,
Yep. Commissioner Wagner.
question for staff. Mr. Barnhart, the text amendment proposed is in reference to counting boat, car, et cetera, storage on soft cover to be counted as hard cover, correct?
Right now, the extended parking of vehicles transfers that area into hard cover. What this ordinance does is says, if you're gonna store your vehicles, store them on hard cover, approved hard cover, which includes the asphalt, concrete, and gravel. So that's the main change.
Okay, so it's actually asking that it's making it unlawful to store said vehicles unless it's on hard cover.
True.
Okay.
I do like that because it indirectly tells you that if you have a smaller lot, you're gonna have a restriction on hardcover, so therefore you're gonna be less apt to store vehicles on that. But to Commissioner Bowles' point, for the bigger lots, that, you know, people that, small hobby farms or 2 acres or above, it's gonna promote them to put hardcover on because they don't have that restriction, so they'll just add hardcover. Do we want that impacting our lakes, that extra runoff? So that's a consideration. It's a kind of unintended consequence if you went all the way in with this one. So my initial thoughts is hearing the great discussion here. Anybody else like to chime in on this one?
I have a question for staff. If this were to be approved, how would it apply to existing nonconformities such as what the gentleman just explained that's going on next door?
Well, this ordinance won't help him, because most of those vehicles are parked on hard surface. They're parked on gravel, they're parked on concrete. The same rules apply, you know, licensed and operable, so those three track tests would still be met. In terms of, this is part of the zoning code, so any change to the zoning code, people would be grandfathered in. But if you move that vehicle and then bring it back, it would have to be parked on hard surface.
Yep.
So that's how that would be.
Commissioner Peterson?
So, from the two neighbors that complained about cars, the cars seem to be a much bigger issue, giving the neighborhood a black eye. I would be sympathetic to somebody that has recreational, small utility trailer, or even any other than a car. I don't think they're causing a problem like the cars do. Can we address this to cars and not just hardcover? It appears that hardcover is not going to be the fix.
Well, you raise a point, sir.
Yep.
You raise a point. I mean, it seems that predominantly the issue is parking of vehicles that are operated sparingly. And I know as a lake community, we have somewhat of a culture where you store your boat trailer off to the side. You know, it's not impactful of your neighbors. Perhaps we can revise this in some more direction and come back with it specific to cars or specific to certain zoning districts. That's a possibility.
Peterson makes the comment about, making sense for a recreational trailer, but not for cars, but you can also make the same argument the other way around. If people have, kids home from college and they're gonna be there, but they're not keeping several trailers. I think this is gonna be a difficult one to get through, but I certainly, I see where there's merits, and I see where there's not. That's the difficulty that I'm having with trying to arrive to a solution here.
Yeah, Commissioner Kirschner, you have any opinion on it?
I do, I understand the intent, but, looking at some of at least one of the examples that was brought forward to us this evening, that was my initial thought right away, is based on these photos, these are all parked already on hardcover. So I guess I would ask Mr. Barnard, what kind of has prompted this? Has it been complaints? And if so, if it has been complaints similar to these, passing an ordinance like this is not going to correct it because they're already parked on hardcover seems like not the best route either.
Occasionally we get complaints about junk cars. And one of the sections of the code that they would be in violation of is how they park that car for an extended period of time. Falls under our definition of hardcover. And so for there, they had an expansion of hardcover without a permit. That's one of the sections of the code that we cite. It's a different one, or it's a difficult one to get a judge or the prosecuting attorney to agree with or to accept, because it's kind of written in the negative. And what we're trying to do is clarify that a bit. Not all cases will it apply, because there are certain situations where other issues can be used. The cars are inoperable, or we can't prove license, that type of stuff. But in certain situations, this is one of the options that we have in terms of an enforcement action. And with all of our code enforcement cases, it's based on a complaint. So we'll go out there and then what sections of the code are they in violation of, and then we write them a letter, let them know the rule is. And then if they choose to fix it, great. If they don't, then we take the next step.
Very good. So to answer your question, Mr. Chair, I guess I have some concern that it's not going to solve at least one of the complaints that we've seen addressed this evening. And, to fall back on my previous career as a police officer, I have experience enforcing junk vehicle ordinances that are specific to inoperable or unlicensed. And for what it's worth, I think that I would stick with that rather than trying to include additional language or violations of hardcover. I think that we have an ordinance that talks to inoperable and in vehicles are unlicensed and unregistered, and I would defer to that one.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Libby, anything else to add?
Well, we had two public comments, slightly different from each other, but yet kind of still falling into the caveats of why people are upset about having errant or abandoned or unattended vehicles on private property. That can be unattractive and distracting, but I think that the draft amendment includes three of the elements of how to deal with that. I think the most difficult part, and your point was well taken as a law enforcement officer, that it can keep the city police department pretty busy, making sure that there is current registration on any and every vehicle that's parked for any lengthy period of time, but still it's a good component of the draft that I think should be there, because anything, whether it be a trailer or a boat or a drivable vehicle, the three caveats or the three elements of the draft amendment stipulate the vehicle has to be licensed, it has to be operable, and it has to be parked on a hard surface. I don't think the hard surface is a bad idea in any way, shape, or form. I think that, this whole idea of having operable vehicles probably is enhanced by having them sit on surfaces where they're not sinking into the lawn or the strata or the accessory lot next door. I think the intent here is to try to have an improvement over the kind of problems that both of these people have brought forward to us as public comments. And I think the second comment suggesting that it did be dealt with either professionally or with a neighborly manner would be the correct way to approach it. It may be a while before a text amendment like this is adopted, or this is why we're discussing it tonight. So that outreach to talk to the neighbors about something that is as disruptive and distracting to your clients, it would be a good idea for you or them to go and talk to them in a neighborly manner. The issue of your reticence about having vehicles, are there vehicles parked there that are not licensed? I mean, if we can look at kind of a practical effect, cause and effect of having licensure, people could just be simply licensing the vehicles to make it easier for them to keep it there for longer periods of time. Some of the licenses don't cost very much anymore. A trailer, you know, an older car, it's not very expensive. But I think the draft amendment, both in its intent and in its language, is practical. And I think that it would serve public good. So I would tend to be in favor with what our planner has brought forward.
Commissioner Erickson, anything else to add?
I think it's been well discussed.
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate the discussion, lots of opinions on this topic, and I can see as a citizen being impacted, this would be very frustrating, and I can see why they come to staff a lot and requesting something be done. But at the same time, I see the complications of it and policing of it as a problem. I definitely see the larger lot impact that, especially, I can see that you kind of a rural aspect of Orono. I think you're getting a lot of pushback of that. Because what it can do is you're just promoting hardcover, because they can do that. And is that something we really want? So for sure, I think we should think about the impact of having hardcover unnecessarily placed in more of the larger lot, the more rural areas of Orono. And you know, like it's been brought up too, we're a community of boat trailers. And is it maybe just more car and inoperable cars and unlicensed cars? Because trailers, you're gonna get a lot of pushback there as well. And the burden on the police department too, that's another thing to consider. So, you know, this is gonna be one that's gonna be decisive, not only in the community, but I think up on the planning commission. I don't think necessarily we can get all in favor up to this point. I think we've had all our votes were all aligned, but I'm not anticipating that one on this one. So with that, I think we all kind of give our comments on this one. I think at that point I can entertain a motion to approve or deny.
I might have further discussion too.
Yeah, I have further discussion.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I've heard, I think, some very reasonable comments in a good range of discussion.
Yeah.
So I've identified three options. You can either approve it as written, you can deny it as written, or you can direct staff to come back with revisions with certain points. I heard maybe cars only and addressing smaller lots versus larger lots. I can talk with the city attorney on how to craft that, and then I can come back to you for a review. I prefer that this group have a recommendation from council in terms of what the ordinance should look like, and I think those comments that I heard from a number of you, I think could be incorporated into a revised draft.
Okay.
So if that's the goal, and again, whatever the motion is, but if that's the goal, then the motion would be to table, directing staff to come back with revisions.
Yeah, we should clarify that. Approve or deny, so that the motion can be to just exactly what Jerry says, and I think that's probably a good one. I think we gotta take the discussion points back and bring it back to this commission and for another run. So considering that, I will entertain a motion.
Well, I'd like further discussion if I could.
Oh,
I want to hear maybe more from Mr. Wallace too, but I think one of the things that I'm trying to wrap my head around what is a solvable way of making it work. And I think Jeremy, I have no doubt that if it doesn't pass, then he might have an amendment that comes back that might be more reasonable. I think I agree with Commissioner Wallace on at least putting some consideration on lot sizes based on the zoning of each lot. I think that's meaningful because real small lake yard lot has a But, you know, I guess one of my questions for, Mr. Barnhart, and for maybe for our own discussion is, you know, is there a number of, you know, I'll call them vehicles as a general term, that we can put a limit on instead of, counting it as hardcover? But then I start thinking about like family Thanksgiving dinners where you've got 12 vehicles that are there just for the day. Does that turn into a violation by how we're wording that language? Or, you know, Mr. Barnhart, do you have opinions on going down that road?
That was one of the original questions that we received from people like Mr. Hahn, who asked us to make changes to the code. And we purposefully avoided limiting the number of vehicles on property for several reasons. Number one, a lot of our lots, our property owners have multiple vehicles. They're friendly people, they have visitors. So we didn't want to get into that level of drafting an ordinance that somehow put a number of vehicles that you can have on property. We felt that that was a non-starter in terms of an enforcement action and the overall goal of the ordinance. So you have 20 cars there, or 19 cars there, excuse me, for an afternoon, for a birthday party or a gathering. Is that a violation, or is that the concern, or is it the car parked right along the property line, you know, all year long? Is that the main concern? And that's what we looked at, is those different situations. So to answer your question, short amount of words, we looked at that briefly and described it very clearly.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, if I may. I just wanted to point out, and to some of the commissioners' comments about registration and operable vehicles and all that, that's already in the code. The only change here is to make hardcover under any vehicle. That's the only proposed change that I'm really, the main change that I see. In reading that and thinking about it, it really does affect the smaller lots that are most likely already at their maximum hardcover or above it. It's basically not giving them the ability to store a boat or anything that they, a small utility trailer, anything that they could possibly be storing now, even if it fit within the setbacks. So it seems like, and I'm not sure if that's the intent of it, is to kind of eliminate storage by making you put in hardcover, or saying, if I want to store my boat there, I have to take my deck off my house because I can't have that hardcover here. You know, that type of thing. So I'm not sure if that's the intent. I certainly hope it's not, but I wouldn't want to put any of those lots now in a situation where they want to store their boat. They can't, because they can't add more hardcover. So they're in here asking for a hardcover variance to extend their driveway now so that they can park their boat there. Or let's say there's a family of 4 living in a house that has a 2-car garage and they need 2 more cars. They can't park them behind there. So they're coming in here asking for a variance to extend the driveway so that they can legally park these other cars in their lot. So I think I don't know if this is the right way to approach it. I just feel like it might be opening a can of worms.
But if I may, Mr. Chair, those examples, that four car or 4 driver family, they're parking repeatedly in the grass. They have expanded the hardcover already. And that's the issue, is just by extended parking on grass, you've created more hardcover.
But is that code violations right now?
It is a code violation. We're just trying to clarify that so that the layperson can understand that.
So just to clarify that comment, as long as they're not maxed out on hardcover, they can do that, is that correct? So it's only a violation if they've already exceeded their hardcover, correct?
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
every property owner in the shoreline makes those decisions.
Right,
How
right.
much.
And I'm going somewhere with this. And the reason why I ask is, you know, Commissioner Balls makes a good point. You know, somebody that's on a 2-acre parcel has a side access to their property, they park it south or, for example, next to a shed. As storage, it's not an abandoned trailer by any means, or a tractor, I think was used as an example. If we were to apply it this way, then we would be asking to now put hardcover there where maybe that's not necessary. And if the way the code reads right now is, we're not requiring it to be hardcover, it has to be counted as hardcover. So that trailer or that tractor would be counted as hardcover, but as long as that homeowner is still compliant in the hardcover that's required, or the maximum hardcover that's allowed, is the way to say it, then it's okay. So, I guess what I'm saying is I think that's not, I think the way it's written right now is good, because then if the person wants to add hardcover to have, you know, more usable purpose of that storage of that tractor, that's fine, but again, you know, I always think about the disagreeing neighbor, forgive me for rambling, but if the neighbor next door says, oh, well, this guy's parking his trailer here, you could easily say, well, yeah, he could put a driveway there if he wanted to, because it's counting as hardcover. He has available hardcover to put that driveway there, you know, versus the person that's maxed out on hardcover, then that is a true problem, just like you noted, but that's exactly how it's written today. So I guess that's my perspective on this, is it's the difference, again, you always put this in the real world, if a neighbor doesn't like a car being parked there, well, okay, you do realize that they could put a driveway there and still be in compliance with the maximum hardcover.
Yeah.
And that's how we're wording it today. I do think it might put us in a position that, you know, again, it doesn't solve the solution of the example that was brought today. This amendment doesn't change that. I think the majority of the people would agree that this is something that we need to change and make work with. How it's proposed doesn't do that, and that's what I think we need to do. Not go back to the drawing board, but maybe reapproach.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to the unintended consequences for sure, and that's what exactly, and especially you gotta consider neighborhoods where your neighbors don't care, the neighborhoods don't care. It's just like, yeah, I got a tractor, you know, you got a boat, I store my boat here, it's a small lot.
Yeah.
But all 12 of us in this whole area do it, so what's the problem?
Right.
So then now we're saying, well, now it is a problem. So yeah, I can definitely see when you're rolling it out, but I think, you know, we got a pretty intelligent staff. I'm guessing if with this feedback, they could probably come back with something, I don't know, it's still gonna be challenged. I'm sure it might come back a couple times, but, you know, I think the feedback given today kind of shows where we're standing. Commissioner Libby?
I'd just like to add that if in fact we go back to have you add additional consideration, legal and otherwise, that we have a very large segment of our population in the city of Orono that have seasonal boat and ice house storage. We don't really want to make it so restrictive. Actually, Commissioner Wallace brought it up, and I agree with his leaning towards that sentiment. You know, the seasonal storage, some of the people have done it for decades. We've not had really a problem with it. It's pretty hard to license an ice house, I think. Are they licensed now? I don't remember.
If they're on the water, they have to be licensed.
Okay, so, but again, this idea of we have three options, and I think we're probably really close to having enough intelligent comments that we can probably make a decision. Of which of the three.
I'd like to second Commissioner Libby's statement as well. You know, our motto is we're the Lakeshore city. So, and a lot of people have Lakeshore, a lot of people have boats, and there are also a lot of people that have boats that don't have Lakeshore.
Yeah, sure.
And, you know, they come here because it's a popular thing. And yes, you won't be using that boat during the winter, so.
Mr. Chair, do I recall that you were open to having a motion?
Yeah, definitely. But I think the discussion was absolutely vital, so I appreciate it.
Okay. If there's
Well, I guess there's more discussion.
Okay.
Commissioner Picture.
Thank you. I didn't get your name, one fellow that was talking about too many cars around there. If it's suspect that they're running a repair garage, can't that go back to staff and that would solve the problem, hard surface or not? So we're addressing a different issue, a different problem.
Yeah, there's a book or ordinance in the books already against car repair, home occupations. The challenge with this situation and others is proving it, but there is regulations to that effect, yeah.
I guess if I can just give one final thought based on discussion here, I think I might be an outlier. I guess, I don't know that I support this at all. I have several concerns that, again, we have, like Mr. Bowles brought up, we have the operable and registered vehicles already, so now we're adding hardcover. And when I think of enforcement of something like this, So neighbor A calls and says, hey, my neighbor next door has got this trailer, it's parked in the grass. And so then, you know, the police probably go out, say, yep, it's in violation, it's gotta be on hardcover. And that neighbor says, great, goes out and dumps class 5 gravel down, and the police come back up to check and say, okay, it's been corrected, but now we've got it that it's gotta be within the setbacks of that zoning district, so that police officer, community service officer know what that is. And furthermore, that person has just added hardcover that we don't know what their existing hardcover is, and they may have just put them over their hardcover. And so I feel like we're just kind of opening a can of worms that may not need to be open, considering they already have the unregistered and inoperable. Go ahead, Mr. Barnhart.
Your points are well made. Expansion of hardcover requires a permit in most areas of the district. So that's where we start. And also, this planning staff is the one policing, is the code enforcement, and the one issuing the permit. So it's not a CSO or a police officer who has to try to interpret what the zoning code is. It's either you have a permit or you don't. And if you have a permit, we've done a very thorough review of what you can have. So that's why it's intended to help most people understand the hardcover kind of limitations of their neighborhood. And so we think that will help them understand those impacts earlier.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the hardcover was a pretty clever way to approach this. So, I mean, when it comes back, as you think about it, and the wheels start to turn, I think there's that there, just as long as we understand the consequence of increasing hardcover, right? And, you know, with a Lakeshore city, we don't want to have too much runoff. So it's a problem, it's a tough problem to solve, but, anybody else on this topic?
Yeah.
Public hearing's been closed, but,
Mr. Barr, I have a question. So would be the proper protocol if we're looking for maybe a reapproach? Do you want us to decline or propose motion, or can we motion to have it reapproach?
Motion to table. I prefer a motion to table based on the direction provided, and then I'll come back with a revision.
Agreeable there?
yeah, just people that are watching this online and you feel very passionate about it, this is where you can, email and, reach out to your commissioners and staff. I think they appreciate the feedback. With that, I'd entertain a motion.
I'm prepared to make a motion to table LA 22-21 for further consideration by staff.
Second.
Just a clarification, did you say 22 or did you say 21?
I'm sorry, LA 22-21.
So, LA, I have a motion to table LA 22-21, and I believe a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right.
Thank you.
Motion passes the table. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
LA 22-22, text amendment regarding vegetation removals in the shoreline overlay zoning district. The ordinance relates to the removal of hazardous and diseased trees. Mr. Barnhart.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. What we're proposing here is there's a distinction between live and dead trees. Removal of a live tree in the shoreline area requires a placement at a ratio established by the Planning Commission by the Council a couple years ago. It's 1 inch of tree diameter removed for the size of the tree removed, up to 36 inches. And then if it's a larger tree than that, and then the ratio drops a little bit, it's a half an inch tree removed per tree. The important distinction is live versus not live. So a live tree, if it's alive at all, requires replacement. If it's dead, it does not require replacement. Where the question has come recently is, well, the tree is hazardous, it's gonna fall down, in the opinion of an arborist. Can we remove that? Yes, you can, but you need to replace the tree the way that the ancient tree, the way the core is now. And the same thing with a diseased tree, where a tree is diseased, again, in the opinion of an arborist, and it should be removed before it infects the neighborhood. There's really no discretion on the staff's level. It's either live or dead, and if it's live, you need to replace the trees. What this ordinance talks about is it kind of clarifies that a little bit, and then an item for discussion for the Planning Commission is should should hazardous trees be replaced? Should we require replacement of those either at the same ratio of a live tree or at a reduced ratio? That's what I'm looking for. Keep in mind that the idea behind the shoreline, the tree vegetation removal limitations in the shoreline area is we're trying to preserve a vegetative shoreline. We don't want clear cut, we don't want yard or lawns or anything. We want to keep a vegetative kind of buffer along the shoreline. So I guess at this point, I'm looking for feedback. The way the code is written, or the way I've drafted it, is on lines 15 and 16. This does not require replacement of trees that are dead, diseased, or pose safety hazards in the written opinion of a certified arborist. That's kind of how we started with the ordinance. Alternative text is provided in lines 29 to 33, which talks about a different ratio replacement. At this stage, I'd be happy to answer your questions. Staff is looking for feedback, and I'd like to bring that forward to the city council.
Are there any questions for staff?
Commissioner Barr, I think might be going into the belly of the beast here, but the certified arborist bit, being it's binary, it's either dead or it's alive. It seems like there might be room for disagreement there. Has there been consideration for a panel of approved arborists to define the livability of said trees? Just trying to think about what becomes open for debate and then next thing you know, you're in a rabbit hole.
Well, we're in the rabbit hole now, but no, we do not consider a panel to review trees. So staff now, when we get a tree removal permit, goes out to see if it has any signs of life. We're not arborists, so we're relying on the arborist community to tell us whether or not the tree is dead or alive. And it's somewhat challenging for us in the winter months because everything's dead. I don't think a panel helps. The idea here, I think, is to try to make people think a little bit about tree removal in the shoreline area. It's not supposed to be pristine, it's supposed to be natural. And so while a tree may not look great, it shows signs of life, you don't get to remove it without replacement. And we're relying heavily on the arborists in these situations, yes.
I wasn't suggesting a panel is that you need to get 6 different opinions. I was just more so thinking, I don't know if there. Yeah, right. If there was a list of reputable arborists in the community that we could say, you have to go to these people because my aunt is an arborist in Nevada. I don't have an aunt in Nevada that's an arborist, but you know what I mean. You know where we're going with this. Just trying to come up with something that kind of gives it some sort of a standardized understanding of it.
I'm relying on the professional certification and the background of these arborists to be able. Now, I'm not trying to create a problem. If it does show that this one arborist always finds a tree dead, keep in mind, we do go out and verify what is observed by the arborist and what we see. But if we start seeing a pattern where people are exploiting that, then we may have to revisit the regulation. But I'm just trying to provide a little bit of opportunity for those situations where it might be the neighborhood's best interest to allow the tree removal at either an alternate, a replacement ratio, or no replacement ratio.
Second question, and forgive me if I might have missed it. Is there a discussion about nuisance trees versus non-nuisance trees? I think of a neighbor who has a
Cottonwood?
giant cottonwood, 8-foot diameter.
I
Sucker
know.
goes down, you gotta find 8 foot of tree to be replaced. I don't know where he's at.
Well,
Or if there's enough green space in it.
you need that,
Okay.
4 feet of trees in a nuisance tree.
Correct.
No, there is no distinction between nuisance trees or not.
I guess that would be something to consider too. If it's a nuisance tree, then no low loss in my opinion. But again, we're not in discussion yet, I just want to clarify.
Any other questions for staff? Commissioner Peterson?
I have to express my ignorance, but I'm going to anyways. Is shoreline, is Is there any other, LMCD or anybody else that has input on this? Let them bother with it, not us.
Believe it, I wish, but we, regulate tree vegetation removal in the shoreline district, which is 1,000 feet back. No, subject to 5 feet back, excuse me.
The limitation is within the lake setback.
Yeah, sorry, we're only talking about the trees between, in the 0 to 75 in the lake yard, adjacent lake, or in the bluff setback, area. The DNR, we get these rules apart from the DNR, so the DNR will provide some feedback on this draft ordinance. But beyond that, we are the primary.
So it's not duplicated effort from another agency, that's fine, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I can interject. Go ahead. I mean, I've actually had a practical hands-on experience with the Lakeshore that we collectively own as an association on Smith's Bay with the Fox Hill Homeowners Association, a very large legacy tree that's disease that really needed to be removed because a large portion of it actually came down into the bay. And having been one of the officers of the association at that time, that had to make sure that we were doing the right thing within the governance and the auspices of regulatory compliance. We did have a considerable amount of interaction with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, who has governance and can deny or grant the removal of that type of foliage or that size tree below the 929.4. So beyond the actual governance that the city has in the average lakeshore setback, the conservation district does have authority and they can deny or approve. And so we took the extra measure as an association to engage the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, who took a little time to scrutinize it, but they did have an arborist that they had come out and examine the tree and then finally gave us permission. But we did not feel comfortable as a governing body of an association of 26 homeowners with 340 feet of lakeshore to just simply have the tree removed. And so I'm just interjecting that into the decision-making process.
All right, any other? Commissioner Harrison, question for staff.
Well, yeah, regarding line 31, I think indicates that a replacement tree shall be replanted in the same setback as the removed tree. Obviously, this would allow some flexibility, along the shoreline. But I'm really wondering if we shouldn't also, perhaps something along the lines of the same setback or greater. The reason what comes to mind is that typically as you go around the lake, you find large trees right on the shoreline. And what happens over a period of time is the shoreline might erode, and the ground might soften, and at some point the tree falls into the lake, right? And so if that happens, is it
wise to plant a new tree right in exactly the same spot or the same distance from the lake, which might be a very short distance?
So whereas if you give the property owner some discretion, if they want to move it back 10 feet or 20 feet, that should be okay, I would think.
Yeah, let's
look at the wording on that a little bit, might be helpful.
Let's button up the questions for staff then. All right, let's open it up for public hearing. If anybody wishes to chime in on this topic, feel free to approach the podium.
Jay Nygaard, 1386 West Point Road. Lived here quite a while myself. I have a huge tree by the lake. I have other trees. My first question is point of clarification, please. You sent me an email, Mr. Barnhart, that said that this was potentially going to say you could replace a diseased tree with nothing. Are you changing that now, or has that changed since you sent me that email? I'm just a little confused.
Mr. Chair, so I've drafted an ordinance that there's two kind of options. One is no replacement required for diseased, dead, or posed safety hazard. And then an alternative text does require replacement of a tree 1-to-1. So if one tree is removed, one tree should be put back.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. I think personally, saying you can just, hey, that's a diseased tree, you don't have to do anything ridiculous. I've got a problem right next door that Mr. Barnhart knows about, where the guy cut down a tree, disposed of it, and then had an arborist sign something afterwards, say, oh yeah, it was diseased. How does anybody know? Well, I know, because I took the bottom stump and I know it's not diseased when he left it on the street. But you have an arborist saying that, and at this point, Mr. Barnhart, if you wrote the ordinance the way you're saying, you'd say, okay, well, no tree replacement. That goes completely against what Orono's been all these years in protecting the lake, especially if you look at the point that Orono's got a 75-foot setback instead of the 50-foot setback that DNR has. We got a third of the Lakeshore. It's extra important that we maintain that. Now, once we talk about that, because I'm completely against that first option for the reasons I told you. I got a tree replacement permit next door when we bought that house because the tree was, the root ball was destroying the boathouse or ice house down by the lake. And so the city came and said, yeah, it's healthy, but you should replace it. So I went through a tree replacement plan. Okay, now I think the tree replacement plan is a little ridiculous because it would have required me to put 8 trees in a line in a certain area. So this really broaches a lot of the topics you guys brought up today. Can you put them a little different or that? And I negotiated a different settlement with the city that I'm not gonna have 8 trees, I can have fewer. Here's good spots where it fits in, and it worked out quite well. What I really see is missing here, off all this discussion, is an actual forestry expert talking about the forest of Lake Minnetonka. Okay, we can't leave it up to residents and a few arborists who might sign something here or there. We have to talk about the fact that we own a third of Lake Minnetonka, and how do we protect this forest as a whole? And maybe we need to bring a forestry expert in order to say, okay, well, if this tree or that tree might go on, then kind of here's a plan for replacing it as a whole, and how do you incorporate that into the city? Because there's so many different kinds of trees here, as we mentioned, weed trees or noxious trees or whatever, and that they should have different scopes. So I guess my whole point is, I understand that they're trying to solve something, but to me they're trying to solve something that's already happened. We already have mechanisms in place to deal with issues like this, and they work fairly well as they did in my case. I think we need to tweak the mechanism so it's realistic, and I think we tweak that mechanism, like I said, by bringing an actual expert in here that can look at the whole city and kind of help the staff, because I'm sure this is over their head, help the staff develop a plan to make it work that way. Okay. By the way, Mr. Kirchner, I think you were right on about the last issue.
Thank you. Any others wish to approach the podium? All right, seeing none, I close the public hearing, bring it back to the commission to discuss. Let's start with Mr. Wrestler.
So I do recall when we've looked at proposed subdivisions, planning for apartments, when we're talking about green space, I believe, and staff can correct me, but I believe we have a certain species of approvable trees that we don't, we've had this discussion, but we're not arborists, right? We're not experts. We can't be experts at everything. Instead of employing experts in the city, we defer that expertise, and that often goes to the DNR and things of that nature. And that's how we define an acceptable species of tree for replacement. I think that still is a good method. I mean, in the public hearing, there was a comment about researching from a forestry department, things of that. We certainly can explore that. I'm not opposed to it, but I believe that's how we are identifying acceptable species of trees for replacement, and I think that's reasonable by definition today. Going back to my initial questions for staff, I don't know, I don't see a benefit of replacing a cottonwood or a tree that's considered a nuisance tree species, and requiring it necessarily, especially if on top of that is a diseased requiring that to be replaced with another one. As far as not replacing to be, not requiring a perfectly healthy nuisance tree, then I could see an argument there that says, okay, we need to replant by our laws and rules that are in place. But I think if it's a diseased tree, then there's that. And then of course, I already have the comments and concerns about the type of certified arborists. That's something that has actually been brought up, so we can talk about that too. But that's just what I wanted to start with.
I appreciate it. I mean, you're right, we're not experts, and in fact, all this hate on cottonwood trees, they actually develop a seedless cottonwood tree, so they, science evolves, so you can actually get, I like cottonwoods because they grow fast, and they don't blow cotton anymore if you buy the right one, so.
Maybe there are
Yeah.
certified
But-
arborists.
But then you don't look at someone talking about a willow tree, so then I'll join that hate wagon, so, it is a matter of opinion, and we gotta understand that arborists, there are some of the especially ones that are licensed and are get paid to cut trees down, well, you can see where their biases will be. I'm a big fan of replacing the trees. I think it is a good point, of where I like the idea of putting in the setback, since this one's particular to the setback. I guess the question I'd like to hear from the commissioners is, if we replace the tree, which I'm a big fan of, to maintain this, forest at Orono, do we want to put it anywhere in the lot, or would we want to say within the lake setback? And so I'd like to hear your opinion on that. Let's see, other items that kind of spark interest. Yeah, you're right, it is a diseased tree. Is it kind of like football, where if the referees, you can call holding on every offensive play. It's like you might find out that every tree is diseased in some way or another. So we definitely don't want to promote that. So all things to consider, but I'll bring it to you guys to chime in. Anybody else like to? Christian?
Yeah, generally, I can come out and just state that the lines 15 and 16 of the proposal, I don't like and I would not support. I think that the alternative text that would require replacement of dead, diseased, or hazardous would be something I would support far more than not replacing. I do note on here that it says just end of a type approved by the city, so I don't think that if cottonwood has to be replaced with the cottonwood, it seems like the city has some discretion there. I believe that the public comments we heard do bring a good point to, maybe we can't just throw a Band-Aid on this and call everything the solution as far as placement of said trees, because we heard this evening of someone who had circumstances that maybe didn't allow for replacement in that exact location, and so I would maybe, I'm just thinking out loud here, and I don't know what others' thoughts are, but I would maybe entertain that, placed in the same location, or allow for some sort of administrative review process with staff to allow for special extenuating circumstances where staff can look at it kind of to a practical difficulties almost of like, well, I can't put it there because I have, the problem that was already once a problem is just going to be a problem again. With that being said though, I would like to try and keep that as something that's administrative within staff and not something that ends up in front of a commission like ourselves or others. I think that that's a decision that our staff would be capable of working through when there's different circumstances that come into play.
Commissioner Erickson?
That brings to mind another reason, besides the lakeshore erosion possibility, there's also, I understand, and I'm not an arborist, but certain types of oak wilt are transmitted through the roots, and they could go a certain distance into another oak tree, right? That kind of is a communicable thing. So that might be another reason why you might not want to replant in just the same spot.
Very good. Let's see, anybody else have thoughts on this? Commissioner Bowles?
Yep. I think the way I read the code as it exists, right now we don't even address these dead or diseased trees. So my understanding is if there's a dead tree, it gets cut down. And to the public's point, that's usually not a great thing. So at first I was in favor of 15, 16 only, to kind of just take baby steps into making this code more restrictive. At least there's someone that has to come out there and certify that the tree is dead or diseased, versus the homeowner cutting it down and trying to do this certification afterwards doesn't make any sense. Most likely, the reason that tree is dead or diseased, or it could be because of the location of that tree. So I think that's a great point, that maybe that if we choose lines 30 through 32, there's, instead of saying it should be at the exact same spot in the setback, it should just be in the lake setback, or something similar to that, which would give the owner and staff something to work with on where they place that tree, and not bring it before another commission. So I guess, to begin with, I was just leaning to just add 15 and 16, but I think the alternative text might make sense if we change the location piece to be variable within that lake area, where it would make sense. And then to the public comment, and that's something that's always bothered me with this tree replacement policy, is in his exact situation where he took a tree out, but he had to replace it with 8 trees in that same similar area, which are gonna cause a problem. And he mentioned that he had some negotiations with staff to make a replacement plan that worked well. Is there a way that we can, does that piece of the code need to be modified a little bit somewhere so that those discussions can happen? Or is, again, it wouldn't be something that we would necessarily want to see up in front of us, and maybe this would be the time to address that while we're addressing the, if it's just something simple to add a word in there.
Well, the way the code's written now is if you remove a live tree, which is what triggers the ratios that we approved earlier, that those trees need to be replaced somewhere on the property. There's no location restriction. And we've run into some situations where the property owner struggles to replace that volume of trees on the property, to which the answer is, don't remove the tree. Because we're talking about a live tree, you just don't like it there, which is not the intent of the ordinance. The intent of the ordinance is a natural situation. If we were to strike 15 and 16, that's fine, and replace it with the alternative text, which requires replacement, which I think, to Mr. Nygaard's point and to Mr. Kirchner's point, it's a natural lakeshore area. It's not necessarily supposed to be pristine. You should replace it in the same general location so that the impact is not felt as strongly from the lake community. So what I'm suggesting maybe is the replacement tree shall be replanted at the same lake yard, so anywhere from 0 to 75. Approved by staff, and then also add a sentence, the city may solicit the review by an independent arborist, just as a further statement that you arborists community, you arborists, we may be checking. And again, I don't think there's a problem. We don't get a lot of these, but it gives us an opportunity to kind of do a check if we need to.
So that would be a table, just like the previous item, or?
Well, I think it's simple, or relatively simple enough. The other one was tabled because we could still go in a lot of different directions. I think we're narrowing it down a direction that I think we can move forward.
So this could be a motion to approve based on a few different changes.
Yeah.
I have a question. So, don't we already have, we're talking about replacement, like, we used 8 trees in that example. I'm reading it in the sections, I'll call it 5 through 14 in that area. We're talking about replacement, it does not have to be the same diameter, it's just the total one. For trees that are less than 36 inches, we just have to have 1 inch for every inch of diameter removed, right? It's not, that doesn't have to be a 12-inch tree that's replaced with another 12-inch tree, right?
Are you referring to the dead, diseased trees?
Yeah.
Being replaced? The way it's written now, maybe we can change that.
Yep.
The way it's written is if you cut down a 20-inch tree, you just have to replace it with a tree. In the same lake yard, we're not requiring a 20 inches of replacement. That's assuming it's diseased or hazardous.
Okay.
If it's live tree, then yes, you're gonna replace it with 20 inches of tree.
And do we want to add any sort of criteria, about somebody that would tear down a tree without having it certified prior?
Well, that does happen occasionally, and the tree replacement or tree removal permit is a zero charge fee. So it's hard to charge double, which is what our normal penalty is. And so the idea is let's be upfront with what we're looking for. The overall goal of this ordinance is to help protect the shoreline, the erosion control issues or the erosion issues. Let's be upfront with the regulation. Occasionally people do cut down trees. Technically, it might be just.
Commissioner Bowles?
Question for staff. In regards to the previous public comment about the live tree that was cut and the replacement trees needed, that would now be covered under this new piece because that could be considered a hazardous tree because it was destroying the foundation of the house.
Potentially.
Okay.
I guess I just have a question, does anybody else have an opinion on, whether we want to require replacement of a tree that is deemed diseased and, what was the word I was using before? Nuisance species.
I think what I've heard anybody say, we're anti-tree, so I think we're in alignment, unless if not, please chime in, I think we're all in replacement of a tree. It's just whether, if it's, like, I think we wanna be careful, because if it's in a spot where it continues to die because of some environmental thing where trees just can't grow there, to have the flexibility in the code, which I'd like to have it in the lake setback. But I also wanna be really cautious about, roots are really vital when you're maintaining, the lakeshore for erosion reasons. So when you have a 8-inch tree and you're replacing with a small one, well, I guess the good news is when you cut the tree, the roots kind of stay there for a while, but they're gonna die out and be less effective. And so when we replace a big tree with a smaller tree, it's gonna take a lot longer for those roots to establish. And probably not a problem for most, but you're gonna have a situation where it's unique and you might need that erosion technique to help. And so that's why I kind of like the language which Mr. Barnhart suggested too, with the staff gets involved in some situations. So it's gonna be hard to word this one, but I do like where the discussion's going and where we're trying to frame this thing. Anybody else have any chime in opinion where you'd like to see this ordinance go?
Yeah, I think the idea of keeping it in the same yard gives you a fair amount of flexibility, but at the same time, it doesn't disappear altogether.
Right.
Commissioner Hessler, was your question specific to the species of trees being nuisance versus non-nuisance?
I guess, and again, it's just my opinion, I'm not trying to sway anybody's, but I think if you're trying to tear down a perfectly good tree regardless of the species, I agree, replant in kind, right, based on how we're defining it. Where I go a different direction is if it's not only is it a nuisance tree, but it's a dead one or a diseased one, then we don't, is my opinion that we would not replace that.
My understanding is with this ordinance, you would not have to replace at the same size because it would be diseased or hazardous, and so you would just need to replace with one that is at least 1.5 inches in diameter. So you could cut down the 8-foot cottonwood and put in a 2 or 3 inch caliber maple tree. And so based on that, I don't know that, I think we would still stick with it, my opinion would be to stick with this and require replacement of that, knowing that someone could get a relatively small tree at a reasonable price and plant something that's a little better.
I'm not trying to change anybody here. Just my
This is,
opinion.
yeah, that's my opinion the other way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that's reasonable too, you know.
All right, so we're requiring tree replacement for diseased or dead trees. Replacement in the same lake yard setback.
Lake yard. it's
Lake
called
yard. Thank you.
It's anywhere from 0 to 75 feet.
0 to 75.
Yeah, so a lot of flexibility there.
Then, how do we, so the approval of the staff, let's see, I don't know, I'm sure you have other ordinances, their language are written a particular way, but give the staff leeway to provide guidance based on, arborist opinion. Right, so is that another way of saying approval from staff?
Yeah, basically what it's saying is you can give us a replacement plan and we will approve it as per the permit.
Okay, those are the three things that I kind of captured. Was there anything in the discussions that you feel like we should discuss further?
I just want to clarify that Commissioner Kircher has motivated me to see it his way. I'm agreeable to his perspective on this. That be glad to support his motion that he's about to make.
Very good. Based on that, I would make a motion to approve, the proposed, ordinance change, including lines 30 through 33, the alternative text that requires replacement of dead, diseased trees deemed hazardous. With that approval, allowing staff to incorporate some sort of an administrative process for the staff to review the replacement location of the tree based on the applicant's, if an applicant raises objections of the location. I don't know, I'm probably a little wordy, but
As suggested by staff previously.
yes.
I'll second all that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or clarification? Crystal clear motion. All right, going with that, I'll go, call vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes. Okay, item number 7, other business. Update on the May 9th, 2022 City Council meeting.
Just briefly, council reviewed several of the items that you had seen. The variance at 1074 Loma Linda, that was approved. The variance for the retaining wall at 940 North Arm Drive. No, I'm sorry. The variance at 940 North Arm Drive, that was approved. That was for the deck expansion.
Pool,
Pool.
the pool height
I
variance.
didn't want to say.
Yep.
That one was approved, and then the variance at 1720 Bowles Point Road, that was for the retaining wall. After much reiteration, the council approved their amended plans, so that retaining wall was approved. And then feedback was provided to Stonewood for their boundary line adjustment variance type of thing at 2987 Casco Road. So feedback was provided, and their next step is potentially a variance or some other actions. That's all we have right now.
All right. I guess the next item of business is to adjourn the meeting.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Adjourn.
They modified it for your recommendation. They brought it down.
Oh, that would have been good. Here I was thinking I was looking at it all wrong.
Yeah, it actually is fun.
That's good. All right, and then I just looked at it like, well, I got that one. What's that? That's still painful work. Yeah, like I said, it's great because you'll be in the chair long enough to get comfortable, and then you'll get in the chair. That's right. Watch this, it'll spread the pain around. Yeah.
Not gonna happen.
Not gonna happen.
I have to go to the first meeting in June 9th, the council.
Second Monday, that's all I need to know, because the first Monday,
June 13th. Yes,
so we
I believe, right, we do it the second and fourth Mondays this month.
so June 13th.
Appreciate it. Have you shown the house? You got any buyers? I wish I did.